So you may remember I told you that Jim Railston was the man who changed my life, and he directed me to study physiology of exercise 50 years ago by a talk he gave to the UCT Rowing Club in July 1969. And recall that he told us that the reason you felt tired during a rowing race was because of the high lactic acid levels. And when I started my research as an exercise physiologist, that's what we believed. We focused on that intensively, and we measured lactic acid levels under all conditions. And eventually, we realized that he was wrong and we were completely wrong. But the key to it was something that happened in my rowing career, which I only realized many years later. And so what happened in my last year of rowing, we were quite a competitive 8 and we trained hard. And we would do 500 meter repetitions like everyone else does. And we would generally do 6 repetitions and then we would call it a day. And on this particular day, our coach, John Fielden, when we finished the 6th and were heading off to the clubhouse, he said, no, guys, turn around, go back to the start. So we went back to the start, cursing and swearing, and we did another 500 meters. And we didn't die at the end. And then he said, go back to the start and do another one. We went back, we did another one. And we did 4 extra, so we did 10. And then I realized, the idea got in my head that you've got so much reserve, you can do much more. Now, if lactic acid was the cause of the fatigue, we would have got more and more fatigue, but we didn't. We kind of reached a plateau of fatigue and didn't get any more tired. Now, what our research showed over the next 30 years is that fatigue is purely an emotion. It's a made-up emotion. That's all it is. It's got nothing to do with what the state of your body is. It's only got a relationship to how close you are to the end of the race. When I started running marathons and ran the comrades, it was very, very obvious. For example, we would run a marathon in April, and then we'd run the comrades, which is two marathons. When you run a marathon and you've gone halfway, you start to feel really tired. And at 35 kilometers, you're feeling extremely tired. When you run the comrades marathon at not too dissimilar a pace if you're properly trained, at 35 kilometers, you don't even think you've started. You go through the marathon distance and you think, well, why was it so easy? And that's because the emotion of fatigue is linked to how close you are to the finish. And it's a terribly important point. So when we coach rugby teams, for example, say, don't tell me you're tired. If you're dead, that's good enough. That's a good excuse to come off the field, but not because you're tired. So this became known as the central governor model of exercise, and it's probably one of the most important innovations in exercise science in the last 100 years. Because what it shows is that you determine the outcome. And what really happens during a rowing race is the following: that at halfway, you get what we call the quitting choice. You now have to decide, how important is this race to you? How much discomfort are you prepared to take? And where you are in the race. If you're leading the race, it's much easier to continue. But the real challenge is if you're coming second or third and you're a boat length down. Then you enter this very dark space, and as I've indicated, we call that the action crisis. And your conscious brain starts to ask the question, is it worth putting effort in for another 1,000 meters when we're only going to come third? And you start to make a bargain. And the key to the successful teams is that they don't make that bargain. They presume that they're there to win, and so they don't get into this dark space. And that is the art of coaching. It's the art of rowing, is that when the action crisis comes, you have to answer it in a positive way. And all the great races in rowing occur because the one crew answers that question, and they realize that the most important event for them is to continue. It was beautifully described in the 8 men in the boys in the boat. If you read the story of their final Olympic race where with 500 meters to go, they're a boat length down and they win by this much. And they then find themselves, because they just trust each other and they give everything they have for 500 meters. And that's the team and the culture and the trust in everyone that produces these results. There are so many exciting moments in sport, but that is the crunch. It's what you do when the action crisis hits. That determines the outcome. So I spent a lot of my time trying to tell rugby teams and cricket teams and other teams that the outcome is the one that you foresee and that you believe in. I was fortunate to give a note to Francois Pienaar's team before the 1995 Rugby World Cup began. And I told them they had to believe that they were going to beat Australia in that first game and that would then set them up for the competition. And I repeated that again before the 2007 World Cup with Jake White. We got the guys to believe that it was their destiny to win the World Cup. And that's the key in coaching. So although you have to be physically prepared and you have to be physically perfect, if you haven't got the brain capacity as well and the desire and the belief, it's not going to work. And I continue to be amazed. I'll bet that if I spoke to a rowing crew, I could improve their performance by 15 seconds with one lecture the night before a major competition. Because you tell people, when the action crisis happens, this is how you answer it. Because that defines who you are as a human being. Absolutely. What you do when the action crisis happens defines you as a human being. And a lot of people, for example, say, but so why should you row? Why don't you just play rugby or whatever? And the answer is because rowing is different and it provides an individual challenge to you to answer that question, which you're not going to get on a rugby field. It's not the same. It's a completely different sport, but your mind is the same. And the benefits that you've been through the action crisis, when the action crisis comes on the rugby field, you'll answer it appropriately. And that's why the idea that people should do one sport or the other and rowing doesn't add additional to the education of young men is nonsense. It's one of the most important ways to educate young men into understanding how you perform optimally and how you put so much effort in. And the outcome is determined by how you use your head and the commitment you put in the training. So I'm a very strong advocate that rowing is essential for young men to do, whatever other sports they may be playing.